So, as a non binary, trans femme, anamorphic queer thing that is happening to be majoring in sociology, I feel kind of qualified to be giving the definitive guide to gender. All of it, including the two white dudes in my slide, because I used a business presentation because I thought it'd be funny. So, what am I doing? I'm going to be talking about gender sociologically and covering a few key theories of gender that are present in sociology that are on this page. So the gender team is these four fine individuals. We have biological essentialism, which is not super popular. It's more of a, you know, evolutionary psychologist, uh, biology thing that people still kind of adhere to. We've got performativity, which is fairly popular and also happens to be my favorite, which falls under social constructivism. The next two also do. Psychoanalysis and co, which, as I've written here, all of the ones that define woman as the other. So de Beauvoir, Freud, Lacan, those peeps. And then finally, individualization, because gender is a social construct and individualization covers like everything in society. And, well, why wouldn't gender be affected? Anyway, let's start off with the stinky one. So, this is the idea that gender is biological, and usually conflating it with biological sex. So, evolutionary biologists tend to like this one and are basically discussing how gender is biology and thus binary, relating to like genes and hormones, and it kind of falls apart when my hormones are not male, but I have some male parts. So hello. Um I also have a note here that maybe sex and gender are one and the same, but they're both together a social construct giving meaning to an underlying biology. I don't know. That's something to consider. And the other like component of biological essentialism is that radical feminists kind of hone in on this and define gender as oppression, as the side of oppression that is a gendered or sexed form of oppression, and that women are oppressed as a result of their gender, which invariably gets defined as having a womb, etc. Which is kind of silly because not all women have functional reproductive systems. So are they getting oppressed because people assume they have a functional womb? And then if so, what about trans women that pass as cis women? Anyway, dumb theory. Kind of has its uses in biology, but even biology is kind of like, well, intersex people exist, so maybe it's not fully binary. Next up, performativity. It's my favorite. Um, it's essentially this idea based around a theory called like speech acts, right? And posits that gender is a performance and arises from, you know, performing it through acts, and it's in the social construct and is only like it only has a meaning at the site in which it is socially interpreted. And so gender is not inside us, but rather we're socialized into a gender and we learn it. We don't know gender. So that's performativity in a very broad overview. So another key aspect of performativity is conceiving of it as existing within a heterosexual matrix, right? Where there's a prescribed set of uh things that must align for you to be performing the correct heteronormative gender, right? You have to dress masculinely or femininely and like women or men and have the right biological sex that corresponds to woman or man. And honestly, that's silly, and heteronormativity is dumb. But that's the theory just says that it exists and not that it's good, and that we should actually, trouble gender, hence the title of Butler's book, Gender Trouble. That's why it's called Gender Trouble, because we should trouble gender. Wow. Anyway, psychoanalysis and friends. So, as you might know or might not know, psychoanalysis is kind of, it has its origins in Freud, right? And he basically is his psychosexual theory of development. It kind of goes, oh, women are failed men and they huff the copium because they don't have the phallus, and something something, the realization of castration and penis envy. It's dumb. But largely it defines women as the other to the default man, which is also kind of present in the Beauvoir, right? So women are defined in opposition to the man, giving man meaning as not woman, and woman is not man. Another key component, though, of what de Beauvoir conceptualizes gender as is that it's something that you become, right? One is not born, but rather becomes a woman, the classic phrase. And what that kind of hints at is that womanhood isn't something that you inherently are. It's something you become through experience, right? Which is existentialism.png. But yeah, it's this. It really leans into the idea of socialization creates gender, and you're not born with a gender, I guess. Now, the really very obtuse and dense and hard to understand one is Lacan. And yeah, no one wants to understand what he's on about, and I swear you could probably have a whole ass course about Lacan and still not really get it. Anyway, I kind of get it, so don't ask me questions. But there's the whole system of the real, the imaginary, a symbolic order, and desire. And so, from what I understand, if we're taking a Lacanian view of gender, it's an imperfect symbol that so the symbols exist in the symbolic order, right? Everything, the universe is created through a symbolic order, right? And so gender is a created symbol, a signifier for a real that exists outside the symbolic order. And people have a desire for unattainable things, for the unattainable real that underlies the symbolic order. And so gender is kind of in that is gender is imaginary, even though it symbolizes and signifies some real that is unattainable, that is maybe not fully intelligible. And yeah, it's very dense. I read one book on it and I still don't fully get it, but I think that's what it's kind of hinting at. Lacan. So next we're gonna take a slight detour into lay/folk theories, and the reason I label it that is because the literature I found labels it as either or. So yeah, as you probably know, as a normal person, normal people have some idea of what gender means, right? And in the research that's been done, essentially there's a split in the opinions, right? There's sex is gender and gender is sex, and gender is self-identification. Those are the two I guess main camps that lay people tend to fall into, right? So typically what the research shows is that women, apart from Terfs, tend to be non-essentialist and are more yeah, self-identification, whereas men are no, gender is sex, fuck you. And this has been supposed to be linked to power and hegemonic masculinity and the dominant position of men in society, right? So make of that what you will. Maybe if you're already marginalized, you might be like, fuck it, we ball and accept other marginalized people. Um, like maybe the reason autistic people tend to also be queer. Mm. But yeah, that's the lay theories that exist. Now we have another one that I really quite like, which is individualization. And it's primarily because it like clearly explains xenogenders. Okay, so how does it explain xenogenders though? If you don't want to watch like a 40-minute rambly stream from me, here is the argumentation that kind of supports that. So, first premise is that gender is a social construct. Premise 2, individualization dismantles societal institutions and sources of knowledge, such as social constructs. Conclusion, individualization is melting gender with regards to it being a social construct and a societal source of knowledge. That's why it explains xenogenders. IMO. So what that kind of means is that gender as an individualized social construct, where individualization has stuck its claws into it and ripped it apart, it becomes a choice as part of your life narrative to make, which clearly would give rise to stuff like xenogenders, right? And maybe there might also be some overlap there with capitalism and kind of merging identity and consumption. Xenogenders can perhaps be a label that shows like your identity and what you consume. Like I've seen xenogenders that are related to video games or fictional characters, right? Like obviously like people are picking those because they relate to them, but in a sense it's tying their identity to consumption. So that's individualization as a theory of gender. Um this isn't necessarily like fully supported like in the literature. This is kind of my own synthesis, but I'm educated in sociology and have critical thinking, so I feel comfortable doing this synthesis. All right. So let's get into like this question, because this is a question that I feel like people would ask. Why are there so many theories? Right? Well, as you can see in this wonderful table here, not all of them fully explain everything. Um, biological essentialism kind of explains like sexual dimorphism and the tendency for cultures to kind of lean into binary gender systems, but it doesn't explain why gender exists in the social realm and doesn't just exist as sex and reflect that every person that is a biologically male acts in a certain way and every person that's biologically female acts in a different way. Like there's clearly variation among masculine and feminine gendered people. Performativity kind of comes in and says that there's coercion involved, right? And that's why there's patterns as to why people act in a certain way, because they're trying to perform their gender within the heterosexual matrix, within heteronormativity, but it kind of doesn't fully explain gender variance within like a given like row of the heterosexual matrix, right? Which is why we have like other theories like intersectionality saying essentially that gender is influenced by other factors and other factors are influenced by gender alongside other factors. Everything influences each other essentially. Um and that's kind of just like explaining partly why there's variation, but it isn't a theory in of itself as far as I like a theory specifically explaining gender, which is why I didn't, cover it. Next, we have psychoanalysis. So it does kind of explain some things, and it kind of describes, especially Lacan, kind of explains how gender can be the way that it is, as a sense of like there's some underlying real with a symbol attached to it. But obviously it doesn't fully capture everything. And finally, individualization also doesn't capture everything, but it explains particularly xenogenders and changing gender roles really well. So maybe if we combine them, we can get a fuller picture, which is why there's so many theories, because they're all lenses. Also, please appreciate my gender sonks meme because I think it is quite funny. So, in summary, there is no objectively correct theory because sociology is not about that. It's about describing society and, combining different theories and lenses, as I've previously called them, to get a fuller understanding is kind of the whole shtick for sociology, right? And also I feel like I should give like kind of a summary of social constructs. So it's it's not just, oh, it's just made up. It's a bit more than that. It's institutions, concepts, etc. They're given meaning through social interpretation, right? It's not just, oh, it's all made up. Like money, for example, is a social construct. It doesn't have a value without people agreeing to it because value itself is a social construct. But like the physical paper cash or plastic, depending on whether you're in a civilized country, um, it clearly exists. It's just the value, the meaning attached to it that doesn't exist without society. And that's really what, you know, what sociology says about social constructs, right? It's not that they're not real or that like they're made up. It's that they're given a meaning through social interpretation. Now, here are all my sources. They will also be in the description because I think that, people proofreading and like going through and reading the things that I read to come to my conclusion is kind of important when you want to understand stuff rather than just saying, trust me, bro, source, I made it up. Um, but yeah, if you enjoyed me explaining gender, I do have a playlist where I go over basic sociology as well. So some stuff can make even more sense. But other than that, I will see you in a future video. Bye bye.